Alright, welcome to this series of tutorials on the Future Retro Vectra synthesizer. This is the Vectra here, and it is a digital and analog hybrid synthesizer. While you're turning it on, you don't want to touch the keys because they're being calibrated, and your joystick is being calibrated too for its center position. So, in other words, if you turn it on and you hold this over here, and it calibrates itself and then you let go, it's going to think that center tuning is over here where it was when it was turned on, so you don't want to touch that while it's initializing. Also, when it's powering up, it's reading the memory card here and pulling in all the names for the files that you've got on the card. And when it's done, it'll bring up this load screen here, and we can see this top encoder here is how we select the current preset we'd like to load. And these are not just presets, they could be files that the user has written as well. Below that, we've got a type selection, which is going to define what type of file is loaded. So each one of these sound files contains both the sound and a sequence. And so this is going to be our default load of loading the sound and the sequence together. We can also load just the sound portion or the sequence portion. And that's nice if you ever want to combine portions of two different files. Let's say you want to take the sound of one file, you could load that, and then load the sequence portion of a different file, load that, and then save those two files off together as one file, one new file. You could rename them and do your save. Alright, so here we've got our power on the left hand side. On the back we've got our micro SD card slot here. You do want to pay attention, make sure your SD card is fully inserted before you turn the power on, and never try removing that SD card when the power is on, as that may corrupt data that is on the card. And also I would note that when you do remove and install this micro SD card, it's really good to actually physically look at the hole that's back here and make sure the card is aligned with the socket. There is an additional little gap below there that sometimes, if you're not looking, you can just push your card right through there and fall right into the chassis, so pay attention when you're putting your card in there. On the right hand side here we've got our 1/4 inch unbalanced audio output, and then along the back here we've got MIDI in, through, and out jacks. And those are going to be your 5-pin DIN size. Obviously you got your 4 joysticks here. The one on the left is spring-loaded, both in the up and down and left and right directions, where these other 3 joysticks are just wherever you set them, that's where they stay. So here we've got our pitch bend. We can bend down 2 semitones or up 2 semitones. Here we've got modulation or mod wheel, and you can go up or down, and either direction is going to be the same type of modulation. So you're just increasing the modulation if you go this way, or if you pull down, you get the same effect. Here we've got our 4-channel mixer, which is a vector mixer. We can use this manually or apply all sorts of different types of automation for it to fade through those 4 different oscillators. Over here we've got the joystick for our analog filter. So this is going to control the cutoff frequency in this direction and the resonance in this direction. And finally, on our 4 stick, we've got an XY coordinates that can be assigned to any parameters you want. And this modulation source is unique in that it can be assigned to multiple different modulation sources simultaneously. Here we've got our 8 encoder knobs, and this is how we adjust parameters. Each one of these knobs, or the encoders, we can turn them to make selections, but we can also press on them. They've got switches built in. We can press down on these. For instance, I can be anywhere here in this selection of files. If I press it once, it's going to take me down to 000, which is our default new instrument setting. If I press it again once I'm at 0, it then takes me to the highest preset number. And you can roll through those. Here you've got your sound or sequences that you can select. And also you'll notice that whenever you are selecting, or you have selected, a sound that is not currently loaded, it's going to give you this prompt along the bottom of the screen to say press load to confirm, and that'll means if you want to load that sound, go ahead and press that. I'm going to go back down here and find a good little, we'll load this. Alright, so along the bottom here, we've got our synthesizer parameters. Here we've got the waveform. Here we've got frequency, frequency modulation, LFO for the oscillators, envelope for the oscillators, and then the envelope mod times for the oscillators. Here we have our mixer. Here we have filter, filter LFO, filter envelope, amplifier, and finally we have some master settings. These master settings are going to apply globally. So here's your master volume output level. And something unique about this is you could have it set to a certain level like this. Press it and it's just going to mute your output. Press it again to unmute. Here's your MIDI channel. It goes 1 through 16. If you press it, it defaults back to channel 1. You can change the MIDI channel on the fly. And what will happen is it'll wait till all the notes you are currently playing have been released to update the internal MIDI channel. Or if the Vectra is being played by an external synthesizer, it'll wait till it's done sending MIDI notes to update the MIDI channel. This is the channel that the internal keyboard, the sequencer, and arpeggiator will send notes out on, and also the same channel that we will receive MIDI notes on. Below that, we've got our global tuning, and this goes from, I believe, 0 to -128 all the way up to +128, and that is just the range of -128 is going to be 1 semitone, and +128 is going to be +1 semitone. We can press this control knob to clear out our tuning. And finally, we have our sleep time. This is the screensaver that's built in here. And so, for instance, it defaults to a value of 5. That means 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes of inactivity of these controls or these switches where the screensaver will then come on. And just to show you what it looks like, we can rotate this down to off and press the button. And that's what it's going to look like when the screensaver is active. Once it's active, we can still play notes, and it's not going to wake it up. We can rotate these joysticks here. It's not going to wake it up. But if we press any encoder switch, or let's force it back to sleep, we can also press any one of these, and it's going to bring us back into an editing mode. Up here, we have already discussed the load. We've also got a save function here. After you've made your edits to a sound and you like what you've got, press the save button, and these 8 encoders now represent the 8 characters of the name. So we could rename this to whatever we want, and when we're done, just go ahead and press the save button. It's going to rename, well, it'll write your current edits to this new name. And again, the bottom is telling us to press save to confirm. I'm not going to save it this time. Instead, I'm going to go back here. If we wanted to just overwrite the existing sound that we had edited, just go here, don't edit your name, and go ahead and press the save key. Here we've got an assign function. And what that does is it allows us to take any of these synthesizer functions and assign them to any of these 8 control knobs. So for instance, we could be over here working in, let's say, oscillator 1. We want to adjust something in the frequency here. Maybe we want to adjust the octave. So the way we would do that is we'd hold down the assign button, press the switch, and then press the destination where we want that to exist in this assign. Now, if you want to clear out an assignment, go ahead and go to the assign mode, which we are at, hold down the assign mode, and double-click one of these controls. You're going to then, if you want to do multiple clearings, go ahead and release the assign button, repress it, double-click, like that, and that is now clearing out all of our assignments here. So let's go ahead again. I want to assign, let's say, the octave of oscillator 1. So I'm going to navigate to oscillator 1, hold down the assign key, press the control I want to assign, and then press the knob that represents where I want it assigned to. So I'm going to press this first one. Let's say I want to assign the octave of oscillator 2. I navigate to oscillator 2, hold down the assign, press that knob, say I want to assign there. We can press our assign knob to go to the assign mode and see what everything is set to. And here you can see I'm adjusting oscillator 1, and it's updating and showing me what the current value is for that. If I'd like to know what the value is for one of these other assign knobs without actually rotating it, I can press the knob when I'm there just to see that parameter value. And for instance, let's say we rotate this down to -7. We can go back to oscillator 1 and see that it's 7 here. If we adjust it here to +3, go back to our assign mode, we can see that its value is 3 there as well. So what this does is it allows you to take various parameters from different sections like oscillators, LFOs, envelopes, filter, various places, and put them all in one spot for, let's say, your favorite or the most useful parameters to adjust for that preset. You don't have to use this assign mode, but it can be useful for speeding up your process. Let's say you're wanting to adjust all the different waveforms of the oscillators rather than have to keep cycling around here and making adjustments. You could just assign them all to the assign mode and then have control right here of every oscillator's waveform, for instance. Here we've got the ARP sequencer, and there are 2 pages here. The first page is basically just your basic parameters. We've got our scale here, and you can select the scale using the keys of the keyboard. Up top here we've got chromatic, that's the default. And you'll notice that when we are underlining the scale, this little keyboard icon pops up here, just helping to remind us that we're going to use the keyboard to make our selection. Let's make our selection here and deselect that. Here we've got a linear transpose. C is going to be the 0 value or no transposition. So we can transpose down by -12, up by +12 there for another octave up, or all the way to +16 due to these extra little keys above the C note there. And we can change that on the fly while sequences or arpeggiators are playing, or we can also use this value to transpose the key bed here into a different range. Here we've got the X scale, which is transposing throughout the notes of the scale that is selected. So whenever we've got chromatic set up here, it's going to act just like the linear transpose, where here is 0, here's -12, here's +12, or at the very top we've got +16. But when you, and again you can see when I select that, the keyboard icon appears showing that that's what you're going to use to make your value adjustment. Now when you go into, let's say, one of the major scales here, now a major scale only has 7 notes per octave, and we have 29 keys here. So what that means is we can have 4 octaves plus 1 semitone of the major scale fit within this 29 note key range. If, for instance, we were to select a minor scale, one of these, the minor scales only have 5 notes per octave, and since we have 29 notes, we are just 1 semitone short of playing a full 6 octaves of that pentatonic scale there. And again, these scales apply to not only just the keyboard, but the sequencer and arpeggiator. And it's nice to know the range here is reiteration. So when you're arpeggiating or playing through a sequence, every time it comes to the loop point, it can play, here's our default value of 0, 1, 2, or 3 additional octaves, or we can go -1, 2, or 3 to play octaves continuously lower. So it'll run through once at no transposition. The next time it'll play at 1 octave higher. Here it's going to play 1 octave, then another octave higher, and 3 it'll play up to 3 octaves higher before going back to that original transposition of 0. Here in the sequencer, you've got your clock. Basically, you just press this to start and stop, and the display is going to show you the current state. Currently it's stopped, now it's playing. Here we've got our tempo. You can rotate it like this, and while the sequencer is stopped, you can also press the tempo to activate MIDI sync function. So now, when MIDI is shown here, you can hook up a drum machine or a digital audio workstation, send MIDI clock to the MIDI in of the Vectra here, and now the sequencer will be controlled by that external device with start-stop messages and MIDI clock messages. Once it's playing, you need to stop your master device before you can deactivate MIDI sync function. And again, like if we are playing internally and press this button, we are unable to select MIDI because we're playing, and that would be confusing. So we can play, we can adjust the swing or the shuffle time from 50% to 75%. We can press down on that to clear it back to a straight quantized 50% shuffle. I'm going to stop that. There's another page here, and this is the sequencer show mode. This is where we do all of our playback and editing of sequences and arpeggiations. We can do fills, edit steps, do real-time and auto-recording. We'll get into that later when we get into the actual sequencer section. Alright, so now let's take a look at the keyboard itself. So this is a 29-note capacitive touch keyboard. You'll notice we've changed the design of the keys, and that's for a very specific reason. You'll notice here that you've got your major notes there, your chromatic notes in this section, and your minor notes in this section. And we do that so that you can just glide your finger through those notes and get specifically glides on that scale of notes. Now the keyboard itself is touch sensitive, and what that means is we don't have to hit the keyboard hard. It all depends on the amount of surface of our finger. So if we press with our fingertip, we're going to get a very light touch, and as we bring our finger down, we introduce more touch. And we could apply that touch to various synthesizer parameters here. Right there, it's actually being used to fade to a different waveform. So there's several different ways you can play this keyboard. So you can play notes regularly. You can strum notes by playing just with the fingertip. Or you can activate the auto glide function by pressing down with more of the pad of your finger as you sweep across the notes. Like that. So you've got a very expressive keyboard here, and the action is very fast since you don't have actual physical keys moving up and down that take time to make a connection here. You're very quick because it's due to the how quickly you can tap your fingers, how quickly you can play. There I've got the glide turned all the way down, so let's turn up our glide. The other thing I'd like to point out about the touch is it's more than just the keyboard that you're touching. So when you activate this, you see how much movement I'm using there with my finger to get the full range of that filter opening up. I can also touch anywhere on this front panel or the metal chassis here to increase my capacitance in my touch and make this touch become more sensitive. Let's try that. And the benefit of doing that would be if I hold my finger here, I can get near the full range of modulation just by moving my finger up and down just slightly. That's much faster than what I can do with this. Also, since this area is going to enhance our capacitive touch, if you ever pull a note down and can't get enough capacitance, just bringing your finger down all the way till the point it touches this part as well as the key will provide the maximum amount of touch. You can also do it up here with these notes. You can also activate glides. Let's set our glide down to something faster here. So the keyboard is very unique, and it then becomes more like an actual instrument, kind of like a guitar, where you can start playing with the body of it and help modulate the sounds that it's producing, as long as touch is assigned. The other thing to note is it's not going to affect the sound while you're just touching this. Touch does have to be applied as an effect to one of the synth parameters, and you do have to be touching the key for that to be active. If you'd like to avoid that, what you can do is when you're adjusting these joysticks, for instance, I'd recommend you just lay your, kind of rest your fingers on the bezels of these joysticks. Number one, that'll give you a reference of where you are, but it'll also isolate your capacitance with the front panel and not alter, your touch response as you're doing this.